The corridor was a sterile wound carved into the heart of the alien palace, its walls gleaming white with antiseptic precision. Light panels buzzed faintly, their glare unforgiving, spilling across the kneeling figures at its center. 5 women, their orange jumpsuits shredded from captivity, were bound at the wrists with ropes tightened deliberately to cut skin and spirit alike. Cameras floated above them, recording every twitch, every line of fear or defiance on their faces. This was not a courtroom, nor a battlefield. It was a stage built to humiliate, designed to send a message to billions of viewers across the stars. Lieutenant Kara Miles knelt in the middle of the line, her back straight despite the ropes biting into her arms. She had been trained for combat, for survival in hostile environments, but no amount of training had prepared her for this spectacle. Her eyes, dark and unyielding, fixed on the farthest camera lens. She knew her family might be watching, her comrades too, perhaps even children who had once looked to her as a protector. If she faltered now, the enemy would win twice, once in body and again in spirit. She clenched her jaw until it ached, silently promising she would not give the king the satisfaction of breaking her. To her left, Corporal Jean Park fought to steady her breathing. She was the youngest of the group, barely past her first tour of duty. Sweat streaked her forehead, and her lips trembled with words she dared not speak. Captured during the fall of Vega Prime, she had seen comrades shot in front of her before she was dragged here. Fear knotted her stomach, yet she drew strength from glancing at Kara. If the lieutenant could keep her chin lifted, then she would try too. Still, the weight of the cameras pressed on her, an invisible audience magnifying every flicker of weakness. On Kara's right were the Reyes sisters, Alina and Mara, colonists taken when their outpost was overrun. Their faces bore the grime of captivity, their bodies thin from starvation, but their eyes burned with the quiet resilience of people who had lived hard lives even before the war. Alina mouthed fragments of prayers, her head bent, while Mara pressed her forehead against the cold floor, murmuring along. To them, faith was a shield no rope could bind. Even here, in the bowels of their enemy's fortress, they clung to belief that something greater might yet prevail. At the far end, Sergeant Tasha Rourke knelt with her shoulders squared and her glare locked on the approaching figure. She was older than the others, seasoned, with scars from battles long before the current war. Her defiance was carved into every line of her face. Unlike Jean, unlike the Reyes sisters, Tasha did not look away, did not pray. She glared at the cameras, at the guards lining the walls, at the king himself as he entered. Her silence was louder than any words could be, a refusal to acknowledge the power meant to crush her. The Galactic King strode into view, his form immense, his iridescent scales glinting like fractured glass beneath the lights. His crown of tendrils writhed as though alive, each pulse a reminder of his psychic dominion. His voice, when it came, reverberated not only through the chamber but inside the captive skulls, slithering into thought itself. Behold, he thundered, his tones cold and resonant, the final remnants of a violent species. Here kneel humanity's daughters, proof of their fragility, their futility. Let all who watch remember this moment and understand, resistance is folly. He circled the prisoners with deliberate pace, claws dragging faint scratches across the polished floor. The cameras tracked his movements, broadcasting his majesty, his cruelty, to every corner of the galaxy. He paused before Kara, his scale visage lowering until his gaze met hers. His psychic presence pressed against her will, probing for cracks, eager for submission. "You still hold your head high?" he asked, his grin a jagged wound of teeth. "You believe defiance matters?" Kara's throat was dry, her pulse frantic, but she forced her voice steady. "You want us afraid? I won't give you that." Laughter rippled through the alien dignitaries watching from balconies above, their multifaceted eyes gleaming with amusement. The king's grin widened. "No, human, I want you remembered." At his gesture, the walls bloomed with holographic projections. Humanity's defeats replayed in merciless detail. Fleets consumed in fire, colonies obliterated, soldiers scattered like dust. Each image dissolved into the next, each intended to underscore the futility of resistance. Yet as Kara looked at the reflections, she realized the cameras lingered not on human despair, but on their resilience. Soldiers fighting until vaporized, civilians carrying the wounded through bombardment, children clutching each other in ruined shelters. The king's theater faltered, twisting against his own design. The guards moved forward, their curved blades humming with energy. The crowd erupted in anticipation, the sound a rising tide of hunger. Jean flinched, her breath hitching, but Kara caught her eye and gave a subtle nod. The gesture steadied the young corporal, just enough to hold her spine straight. Alina and Mara prayed louder, their voices threading through the tension like fragile light. Tasha spat at the floor, eyes blazing with venom. The first execution came swift, a blade flashing down upon Mara before the cameras. Her scream tore across the galaxy, broadcast into homes, ships, and council chambers. The king lifted his arms in triumph as her body fell, but the sound that reached humanity was not humiliation, it was fuel. Mothers wept, fathers swore vengeance, soldiers beat their fists against steel walls. The Empire believed it had shown dominance. Instead, it had revealed the depth of its cruelty. One by one, the women were struck down, each death magnified, each final breath seared into memory. When Kara's turn came, she locked eyes with Anir's camera. Her lips shaped two words, fight them. The blade kissed her throat, and then the broadcast ended, the screen replaced with the sigil of the Empire. Silence swept across the galaxy, yet the image endured. On Earth, in colonies scattered like embers, in stations orbiting distant suns, people replayed the footage again and again. Not to cower, but to remember. Kara's unbroken gaze, Tasha's defiance, Jin's trembling courage, the sisters' prayers, they became more than victims. They became symbols, carved instantly into humanity's collective soul. The king had sought to extinguish hope, but he had forged martyrs instead. The Empire celebrated its spectacle, but humanity's grief crystallized into fury. The deaths of 5 women had done what years of war had not. United every colony, every fleet, every fractured faction into one will. Across the stars, a single vow spread like wildfire, whispered first in sorrow, then in rage, never again. The footage did not fade from memory. It lingered on every human screen, replayed again and again, not by decree but by demand. Families who had never met Kara Miles, Jean Park, or the Reyes sisters whispered their names as though invoking saints. Sergeant Tasha Rourke's glare, captured in that final moment, became the emblem painted on helmets and scratched into steel bulkheads. What the Galactic King had meant as a demonstration of dominance had transmuted into an indelible mark of defiance. Humanity's grief had boiled into rage, and rage now needed direction. In the capital city of Earth, towering spires of glass and steel reflected a gathering unlike any before. Leaders from every colony, admirals recalled from distant fleets, governors who had once bickered over tariffs now stood shoulder to shoulder in the Grand Council chamber. The air was heavy with the scent of burning incense and recycled oxygen, the weight of mourning pressing on every mind. At the center of the chamber, Admiral Elias Mercer, broad-shouldered and silver-haired, stood with fists braced against the council table. His eyes carried the exhaustion of decades of war, but behind them glimmered something sharper. "You've all seen the broadcast," Mercer said, his voice gravelly but steady. "The king thinks we are broken. He thinks the slaughter of 5 women will paralyze us with fear. I say he's made a mistake he cannot undo." Across from him sat Dr. Helena Vera, a civilian leader from Mars, her presence unusual in a council dominated by soldiers. She leaned forward, her expression taut, the grief in her eyes freshly carved. Her younger sister had been among the executed, though she had spoken little of it until now. "Mistake?" she said, her tone cutting through the murmurs. It was a declaration, not against soldiers, not against fleets, against humanity itself. We no longer have the luxury of hesitation. The chamber hushed. Even those who had long argued for appeasement could not easily counter the force in her words. General Marcus Delane, a towering man with scars seared across his jaw from plasma burns, growled agreement. "We fought defensively for too long. Colony after colony abandoned, lines redrawn again and again. They wanted to humiliate us, and in doing so, they've awakened something else." He pounded his fist lightly on the table. "I say we strike first. No more retreat." Others hesitated. Governor Patel of Europa adjusted his collar nervously, beads of sweat forming on his brow. "Strike? With what fleets? With what resources? The Empire dwarfs us in numbers and in technology. If we commit to open war, our losses will be catastrophic. Entire systems may burn before the year is done." Helena's voice rose again, not shrill but unwavering. "And if we do nothing, we burn anyway. My sister's blood isn't the first they've spilled. But if we allow it to be the last drop that stirs us, then we deserve extinction." The chamber erupted with overlapping voices, some in agreement, others in protest. Admiral Mercer slammed his palm against the table, and the sound reverberated like a gunshot. Silence followed. "Enough," he said. "We are not debating whether war comes. War is already here. What we must decide is whether we fight it on our knees or with steel in our hands." The statement landed heavily. Around the chamber, council members exchanged glances, many of them realizing that history had cornered them. The footage of the 5 prisoners played behind their eyes, unbidden, and there was no erasing it. As the debate quieted, Helena stood once more. She carried a data slate in her hand, which she projected onto the chamber's hollow screen. The image that filled the space was Caramile's face in her final moments, lips forming the silent command, "Fight them." Helena's voice trembled, but did not break. "This is what they gave us. Not despair, not submission, a command. If the dead could speak, they would tell us there is no turning back. So we must decide, do we honor them, or do we cower?" The words tore through the council like shrapnel. Even Governor Patel lowered his gaze, unable to argue against the weight of sacrifice. Slowly, one by one, voices shifted. General Delane pledged every regiment under his authority. Admirals committed their fleets, however ragged. Even the hesitant governors nodded grimly, acknowledging that unity was now their only path. Mercer exhaled, a sound like a man finally unclenching after years of waiting. "Then it is decided. Humanity declares total war on the Galactic Empire. No half measures, no appeasement. From this day, every factory becomes a forge, every colony a citadel, every citizen a soldier if need be." The declaration was formalized with signatures, but the weight of it did not need parchment. It echoed in the bones of everyone present. Across Earth and the colonies, the announcement spread within hours, carried by networks that pulsed with urgency. Factories began retooling overnight. Civilian scientists poured into military research facilities. Volunteers flooded enlistment offices, some too young, others too old, but all burning with the same fire. Among those who heard the call was a mechanic named Aiden Ross, laboring in the shipyards of Titan. He paused from welding a fractured hull, sweat streaking his soot-darkened face, and stared at the broadcast. He had never fired a weapon, but in Caramile's eyes he saw something that left no room for doubt. He wiped his hands on his coveralls and walked straight to the recruitment line. His story was echoed in thousands of others, ordinary lives pivoting toward war. Even within the ranks of soldiers who had known nothing but retreat, the change was tangible. Captain Leora Vance, stationed on the battered cruiser Resolute, gathered her crew in the mess hall. She played the council's declaration on the projector and then turned to her weary sailors. "We've been running for years," she told them, voice thick with resolve. "No more. The line we hold now isn't just for ourselves. It's for Kara, for Jean, for every name the king thinks he can erase. We will prove him wrong. Her crew responded with fists pounding on tables, the sound reverberating like a heartbeat. For the first time in years, they believed. Back in the Grand Council chamber, the declaration had not ended in triumphal cheers, but in silence. Heavy, solemn, yet unbreakable. Each leader understood the magnitude of what they had committed to. Many would not live to see the war's end. But that knowledge only reinforced the necessity of the decision. As the chamber emptied, Admiral Mercer lingered by the hollow screen, staring at Kara's final expression. Dr. Vera approached, her face drawn with fatigue. "Do you think we can win?" she asked softly. Mercer did not answer at first. He kept his gaze on Kara's lips, replaying that silent command again and again. At last, he said, "I don't know, but I know we must fight as though we can. That's what they gave us, the chance to prove ourselves worthy of survival." Helena closed her eyes briefly, then nodded. "Then we'll make sure their sacrifice wasn't wasted." The council doors sealed behind them, and already the machinery of war was groaning to life. Across the stars, humanity was moving, galvanized not by ambition or conquest, but by grief transfigured into purpose. The Galactic King had wanted submission. What he had conjured instead was unity forged in fire. And as Earth's skies filled with the glow of ascending ships, one truth spread on every tongue. The war had begun, and there was no turning back. The first strikes were not grand battles, but whispers of defiance cutting into the Empire's vast machinery. Human fleets, once scattered and retreating, began to emerge from hidden bases like wolves from their dens. Small corvettes darted through asteroid fields, slipping behind enemy supply convoys. Improvised charges detonated against fuel freighters, turning once secure routes into charnel lanes of drifting wreckage. Each raid cost dearly. Sometimes entire crews sacrificed for a single victory, yet the effect was unmistakable. For the first time in memory, the Galactic Empire bled. On Titan's shipyards, Aiden Ross stood among sparks and molten steel, watching the birth of vessels that should not have existed. They were crewed by galactic standards, patchwork hulls welded from scrap, their weapons cobbled from salvaged alien tech. Yet they carried something no empire could replicate. Human desperation sharpened into ingenuity. Aiden had joined the engineering corps not as a soldier, but as a builder. His hands, scarred from years of labor, now molded the tools of vengeance. Each ship launched carried a fragment of his hope, a silent promise to those whose blood had been spilled. On the front lines, Captain Leora Vance guided the cruiser Resolute through its baptism of fire. The ship was ancient, patched together so many times its hull was more scar tissue than original plating, yet it moved with surprising grace under her command. During an ambush on the mining moon Calyx 4, she orchestrated a daring maneuver, using the moon's magnetic storms to cloak her approach. When the enemy warships arrived to collect or shipments, the Resolute and its escort unleashed a coordinated strike. Plasma torpedoes gutted the lead vessel, while human fighters swarmed like hornets, targeting engines and supply pods rather than trying to match firepower. The battle lasted less than an hour, and though 2 human frigates were lost, the victory echoed louder than the cost. News of the triumph spread across human space, each retelling swelling into legend. At the Grand Council's urging, Admiral Mercer oversaw the coordination of these scattered assaults. His war maps glowed with crimson lines of enemy supply chains, and his voice, carried through encrypted channels, became the anchor that held the fragmented fleets together. He reminded his officers constantly that humanity's strength lay not in brute force, but in unpredictability. "They expect us to fight like them," he would say, "so we must never oblige them." His strategies focused on harassment, disruption, and psychological warfare, each victory magnified not by scale, but by symbolism. Dr. Helena Vera, meanwhile, had transformed her grief into a different kind of weapon. She spearheaded a propaganda campaign, hacking into alien communication networks. It began with small infiltrations, brief interruptions of broadcasts with static-laden images of the fallen women. But soon, entire transmissions were hijacked. Alien citizens who tuned in to routine Imperial news suddenly saw Caramel's defiant gaze, lips whispering the words that had become a mantra: fight them. To the Empire, it was an act of vandalism. To humanity, it was reclamation. Helena understood that war was not only waged in space, but in hearts and minds. Each time the image spread, the memory of humiliation was inverted into a rallying symbol. But victories came at a price. In one raid, Corporal Gene Park's younger brother, enlisted on a frigate, was lost in an explosion that consumed half his crew. The loss shook Gene, who had survived her own capture only to carry the weight of another death. She threw herself into training recruits, her voice sharp, her eyes shadowed by memory. To her trainees, she was relentless, driving them until exhaustion blurred their vision. Yet beneath her stern commands lay a desperate need to shape soldiers strong enough to survive where her brother had not. The Empire retaliated with fury. Entire colonies were bombarded in reprisal. Cities turned to ash, survivors hunted through ruins. Each act of brutality only hardened human resolve. In the council chambers, arguments flared over whether the cost was too high. But whenever hesitation threatened to fracture unity, Helena would replay the footage of the women's final moments. Their sacrifice remained the compass, the reminder that surrender was no longer a path. Admiral Mercer devised a plan that would test the limits of human courage. The Empire's war factory, orbiting Varys Prime, supplied nearly a quarter of its frontline fleets. Its defenses were impenetrable by conventional standards. Minefields, automated turrets, and a garrison larger than any human fleet could face directly. Mercer's strategy was audacious, a multi-pronged feint drawing the Empire's defenders outward, while a strike team infiltrated the factory itself to cripple its production core. Captain Vance volunteered the Resolute for the mission, despite knowing the odds. She addressed her crew in the hangar bay, her voice echoing over the clang of tools and the hiss of coolant. "We are not the strongest fleet," she said, "but we are the most determined. They believe we will break against their walls. We'll show them that walls can crumble." Her crew responded not with cheers, but with silence, heavy with understanding. Every soul aboard knew they might not return. The attack unfolded with precision. Decoy fleets engaged enemy patrols across the sector, while the Resolute, cloaked by stolen alien stealth tech barely tested, slipped into orbit of the factory. Aiden Ross, now assigned as a combat engineer, manned the improvised devices that would overload the factory's power grid. The infiltration was chaos, corridors filled with fire, alarms shrieking, enemy soldiers flooding to repel the intrusion. Yet human tenacity carved a path where logic said none existed. Aiden watched as comrades fell, each loss biting deeper into his resolve. But when they reached the core chamber, he forced trembling hands to connect conduits, to override alien systems he barely understood. Sparks showered, circuits screamed, and the grid buckled. Flames erupted in chain reactions, consuming the factory's heart. The explosion lit the void, a silent inferno witnessed across the system. The cost was immense. The Resolute limped away with half its crew gone, hull in tatters. But the victory was undeniable. The Empire's war machine had been dealt its first crippling blow. Across human space, celebrations erupted. Bells tolled in colonies that had not dared ring them in years. Children painted Kara's face on walls beside depictions of the burning factory, proof that the dead still guided the living. Back on Earth, Admiral Mercer received the news in silence. He knew better than most that one victory did not end a war. But when he looked around the council chamber, he saw something that had not existed before: belief. Not just in survival, but in triumph. Helena placed a hand on his shoulder, her expression weary yet alight. "They can be beaten," she whispered. Mercer nodded, though the lines of his face remained grave. "Yes, and now the king will know we will never stop." In the Empire's throne world, the Galactic King learned of the factory's destruction. His tendrils writhed with fury, his voice thundering through his palace halls. He demanded reprisals, demanded blood. Yet even as he raged, A whisper began to spread among his subjects. An image replayed on stolen broadcasts, a human woman's face defying death itself. Fear was no longer the only contagion in the galaxy. The war had shifted. Humanity had proven it could strike back. But the king was far from finished, and his wrath would soon descend with a weight none had yet imagined. The destruction of the war factory on Varys Prime reverberated like a shockwave through the Empire. For the first time in living memory, the Galactic King's dominion trembled. Yet victory carried its shadow. Entire fleets were dispatched in reprisal, and colonies that had celebrated days earlier now found themselves targeted with merciless fury. Cities burned, oceans boiled under orbital bombardments, and survivors clawed through ruins searching for shelter. Humanity had bloodied the Empire, but the Empire's wrath was a storm determined to drown them. Admiral Elias Mercer stood at the center of the war room, maps and signals spiraling across the hollow table. His face was lined, not just with age, but with the burden of countless deaths. Around him, commanders reported the mounting toll, stations abandoned, fleets fractured, soldiers exhausted. Mercer's jaw tightened as he listened, his silence heavier than words. Yet beneath the weight of despair, a thread of defiance held him upright. He could not let them see doubt. Not now. Dr. Helena Vera watched him carefully. Her voice, once trembling with grief, had become one of the sharpest instruments in humanity's arsenal. Through her broadcasts, the faces of Kara Miles and the others had become immortal, symbols woven into the very fabric of resistance. But Helena understood the fragility of symbols. If humanity faltered now, the king's narrative of inevitable conquest would resurface. She stepped closer to Mercer and whispered, "We can't outlast them. We must end him." The idea, though whispered, spread like fire through dry grass. To strike not at fleets or factories, but at the Galactic King himself. His throne world was a fortress, bristling with defenses, guarded by legions. The thought bordered on madness. Yet as General Marcus Delane growled in agreement, and Captain Leora Vance, still scarred from the factory assault, volunteered her battered Resolute, the plan crystallized into something more than fantasy. Humanity would gamble everything on a single stroke, the death of the king. The council chamber filled with arguments and counter-arguments. But in the end, there was only one truth. Every other path led to slow extinction. The strike would be costly, perhaps catastrophic, but it was the only chance to sever the Empire's head. And so, under a shroud of secrecy, fleets were marshaled, soldiers selected, and engineers like Aiden Ross tasked with fashioning weapons designed not for prolonged campaigns, but for a single decisive strike. The journey to the throne world was perilous. Decoy fleets scattered across the galaxy, drawing Imperial forces into chaotic chases. The Resolute, patched once more and carrying far more hope than metal should bear, slipped into hostile space with a small vanguard. Aiden worked feverishly in the belly of the ship, ensuring the sabotage devices would trigger when the moment came. Each clang of his tools echoed in his chest, reminding him that his hands, built for creation, were now harnessed for destruction. As the strike force neared the throne world, enemy patrols closed in. Leora guided the Resolute with near-miraculous precision, weaving through asteroid belts and sensor grids. The ship groaned under pressure, but her crew followed her without hesitation. She knew why. They no longer fought for survival alone. They fought for the women whose faces haunted every broadcast, for families scorched from their homes, for children born into war. Each order she gave was tempered with that knowledge. The final approach tore through layers of defenses. Battles erupted in orbit, fire blossoming against the void. Human ships were ripped apart, their fragments scattering like glowing embers. Yet for every vessel lost, another pressed forward. Admiral Mercer, commanding from the lead carrier, barked orders through gritted teeth, his voice steady even as explosions shook the deck. Hold the line. Get the strike team through. His strategy was brutally clear. Sacrifice fleets to open a corridor. Every captain who died knew it, and none faltered. The Resolute broke through, battered but intact, plunging into the upper atmosphere of the throne world. Its hull screamed against the pressure, flames licking across its surface. Inside, Aiden clutched his equipment as soldiers prepared to breach the palace. Leora's eyes locked on the sprawling citadel ahead, its spires rising like jagged teeth. She allowed herself a single breath, then ordered the descent. The landing was chaos. The strike team surged into alien halls filled with shrieking alarms and defenders pouring from every archway. Blaster fire lit the corridors, smoke thickened the air, and the ground shook with the Empire's fury. Aiden stayed close to the soldiers, his tools converted into weapons of sabotage, planting charges along critical conduits. Each explosion echoed behind them, ripping holes in the palace's veins. Helena's voice carried through portable transmitters, broadcasting the incursion in real time. Across human space, people watched as their soldiers stormed the throne world itself. The images of the POWs had begun the fire. This broadcast was the inferno. For the first time, the galaxy saw not prisoners kneeling, but humans advancing, their determination unshaken. At the palace heart, the strike team breached the throne chamber. The Galactic King loomed upon his dais, tendrils writhing, his scaled body gleaming in the unnatural light. His roar shook the chamber, both sound and psychic assault, hammering against human minds with suffocating force. Soldiers staggered, some collapsing under the weight of his presence. But Leora, gripping her rifle, forced herself forward. "For Kara," she whispered and fired. The battle was savage. The king struck with claws and psychic fury, hurling soldiers like ragdolls. Yet humanity pressed on, each loss only driving the survivors harder. Aiden, bleeding from a gash across his forehead, crawled to the control nexus and wired his final device into the system. Energy surged, overloading the palace's defenses. Sparks rained, lights flickered, and the king bellowed in rage. At last, it was Admiral Mercer himself, having forced his way through the melee, who delivered the final act. His sidearm discharged into the king's chest, the blast amplified by Helena's hacked broadcast, ensuring every corner of the galaxy witnessed it. The king staggered, tendrils thrashing wildly, before collapsing in a shudder that shook the chamber. The silence afterward was deafening. Humanity's strike team, battered and bloodied, stood among the wreckage, staring at the fallen tyrant. Helena's voice broke the quiet, steady despite the tears on her face. "The king is dead. Humanity is free." The broadcast carried her words to every world, every colony, every ship adrift in space. Cheers erupted, tears flowed, and bells that had long rusted in silence rang once more. The war was not over. The Empire's legions remained, but the heart had been pierced. The myth of invincibility shattered. In the weeks that followed, statues were raised not of generals or admirals, but of the 5 women whose deaths had lit the fire. Annual remembrance days were declared, where silence fell across cities for 1 minute to honor Kara, Jean, Alina, Mara, and Tasha. Their names were carved into steel, spoken in classrooms, etched on starship hulls. Admiral Mercer never claimed victory for himself. He retired to a quiet colony, carrying the ghosts of those who had fallen. Helena continued to guide humanity, ensuring the story remained uncorrupted, that the memory of sacrifice was never cheapened. Leora rebuilt the Resolute once more, vowing to keep it flying as long as humanity had enemies. And Aiden, hands still scarred, returned to Titan, where he built ships not only for war, but for the future that sacrifice had won. Humanity had proven that it could not be broken. The king had sought to extinguish them, but instead, he had forged them into something unyielding. Across the stars, a single truth endured, whispered on every world. They tried to end us, and in doing so, they taught us how to rise.